opportunity to broach this subject one last time. This realization grants an opportunity to share with you 15 mantras for a joyful giver. Number 1. I'm just kidding. I know you're as tired of that as I am. Oh, that wasn't fair. Okay, you all owe me one. Let's start again, seriously. From our epistolary reading from 2 Timothy, for this gospel I was appointed a herald and an apostle and a teacher, and for this reason I suffer as I do. But I am not ashamed, for I know the one in whom I have put my trust, and I am sure that he is able to guard until that day what I have entrusted in him, as Terry read for us a moment ago. Paul, to his dear friend and fellow servant of Christ, Timothy, expresses his bold and confident attitude regarding the good news of Jesus Christ. He goes as far as to compare it to a witness, as if in a court of law, bearing testimony of his experience. Now, we've spoken of this before when we talked about N.T. Wright. And N.T. Wright has this idea about redemption and atonement that it is likened to a day in court, that there had to be this association with covenant, and there had to be this idea of Jesus incarnate, at the same time Messiah, and this completion of the law and fulfillment of all the prophecy. All this happening together. Imagine that's all the witnessing, all the testimony that you hear from the witnesses that are called from both sides of the argument. And at the very end, as if Christ was our legal counsel and offers an empty tomb as the evidence necessary, you are exonerated, totally and completely absolved. You walk out free of whatever that was. That accusation that was on you that was going to carry such a heavy punitive consequence. But you walk out and you're totally free. That's atonement. Well, I'd love for us to really unpack that. But for today's purposes, let's focus on the witness part of that and the setting for the testimony rather than the idea of atonement and redemption. We'll unpack that another time. So what about this idea of witness? Now, growing up Southern Baptist evangelical, the idea of witnessing to others was a presumed responsibility. A faith that was not shared with others was stagnant and possibly non-existent. This idea is off-putting for Episcopalians. Now, it's hard to get an Episcopalian even to pray in a church setting, over a meal or something. But, if you were to approach, we've all had these awkward moments, right? You've been in the hall or you're in the park or whatever, and somebody comes up to you and they're particularly assertive, and you know Jesus, and these are off-putting, awkward kind of moments. And so the Episcopalian out there, you ask them to share their faith, then they climb up quicker than a New York minute. It's like that. If it's a busy, happening occurrence or event, and we say, okay, guys, we're going to stop doing whatever we're doing, and we're all going to share our testimony. It would be tumbleweeds, crickets in the background. In fact, a lot of times, Episcopalians even kind of think that's a tacky suggestion, So why is that? Why is that? I think what we need to do is we need to kind of go back to some basics. Just some basics of sharing your faith so that we can kind of clear the air of all this heaviness that's associated with it. So here's a principle to get the ball rolling. You are granted permission to approach witnessing without associating it with evangelism. Because we all have this idea of Ernest Kingsley on the television. Right? Does anybody know who Ernest Kingsley is? The televangelist types, and that's when we are in a position where we're going to share our faith, we kind of feel like we're likened to that, I guess. And nobody wants to do that. Please don't do that, you know. So right now, up front, you're given permission not to be associated with any of that. Now, evangelism and evangelicalism is a socio-political religious movement. It's originated in the 19th century, and it was very much a response to enlightenment and the age of reason that it had in the century prior. Now, real life became all this wonderful idea of philosophies were reintroduced, and the arts were expounded, and at that same time you had scholasticism. That may not even be a word, but I think you know what I'm trying to say. You had higher education for the first time. People were becoming more educated, and you know what happened? People started thinking, and this was a real big issue. And so the response from the church was to address this growing dissonance that was occurring between the church and the church-going populace. The idea was that the church, mostly and not limited to Protestants, answered with an approach on the part of some to assertively streamline the gospel message into a conversion-heavy narrative, leading eventually to what would be the Great Awakening and the likes of Jonathan Edwards and sinners in the hands of an angry God. You know, that sort of thing. It stated simply, the thrust was conversions, conversions, conversions. We need to save all of these sinners from their thinking, and that's the main purpose of the church. Enlightenment and evangelicalism then would square off through several rounds back and forth over the next several centuries, and that brings us to where we are now. And the result of that is, of this ideological sparring, is that the church became more and more distant from the public. And it almost felt like the church was this somehow angry component of our reality, of our culture. And all they wanted to do was shout at us and tell us how bad and evil we were. So, let's look at some basics of evangelism. And I think maybe this will cast it in a different light. First of all, evangelism, or sharing your faith, is an earnest accounting of the experience of grace. Okay? Now, confession time. Previously, I was not a big proponent or an advocate for industrially expressed grace. Okay? But I had a car accident in the village. And you know what saved my life? Engineering. Chromosomes. Seat belts. Airbags. Saved this guy's life. Okay? So now, ask me about it. I'm glad to tell you all about the wonders of airbags. I can't wait. You see, it's happened to me. It's this honest expression of something that happened to me in my life. I'm like, yeah, oh, let me tell you something. This is the best stuff ever. And I should be really dead right now. And I'm okay. So I think you can probably see where I'm going with this. How much and more should we be witnesses of God's grace for us in the form of an incarnate Jesus Christ? Paul says that we should not be ashamed, but rather be bold in our sharing. Next point. Witnessing is an expression of sincere interest for another. It's been described as one beggar telling another beggar where they can find food. That's a beautiful description. Dear ones, those who are not aware of the treasure of Christian community and the hope of our faith and the avenues through which we attain peace and fulfillment. I was talking to Jason earlier. He learned how to play the guitar. That was an avenue of faith. And now the blessing that is not only for him, but for us as we're hearing him play the guitar. This is a wonderful thing. Our friends who aren't aware of this, they need to know. They need to know the great news, the good news that is great news that we have known. why would we keep it a secret? Finally, testifying need not be perceived as an obligation or a requirement. You just check off the box as you go. But rather, it's a gratitude. How can I help but share my faith? We share our faith through expressions of our spiritual gifts as they are assigned to us for the purpose of advancing the kingdom. The most effective way to be testimony for the good grace of God is to live your life in a manner that other people see. It's not pounding on pulpits or banging on doors. It's more like living your life in a way. You've been given these specific spiritual gifts for a reason. You find those and you apply those, and people see that, and they see the joy and the peace and the fulfillment that comes with that, and they want some of it. They want some of it. That is the most effective way. Jesus was the truest and purest model of evangelism through Christ's life. Christ's life. There was such a difference there. People just were intrigued by this guy. And so I think the way we live our lives is the clearest testimony that we can give. It's like the old saying, witness a lot and sometimes use words. Be a witness all the time and sometimes use words. Did you catch the point of our Old Testament reading in Lamentations? Lamentations, the whole book is about Israel crying. It's not a good book to read after you just watch some sad movie on television, because it's not a big deal. What's happened is the Israelites were taken into Babylonian captivity, and now they are really upset about it. And the whole book is about that. But at the same time, even when they were in Babylonia, when they were in Babylon, they still, away from their home, that sad, were still a witness to their God. Paul told Timothy that we can trust God until our final day, being heralds of God's grace. Lamentation said it a different way. Great is God's faithfulness. The old hymn, great is thy faithfulness, great is thy faithfulness. Morning by morning new mercies I see. All I have needed thy hand hath provided. Great is thy faithfulness, Lord, unto me. God, faithful to us, giving us grace. Then we're faithful in return, sharing that with others. Ask me about it. Just get me started.